There are a lot of people here who may not be too happy with the performance of the government and have their own sort of pet peeves with the government.
And I'll be one of those who will be the first to think the government is trying to clamp down on us.
And because of the way our country is, we don't have that capacity to debunk, fact check. We don't have those capacities yet.
So we also have to be very careful about that.
When we talk about the context of Uganda, we are not saying that FIMI is affecting just Uganda, it's the entire world. You know, it's not just the continent, it's social media, it's global, because that's one of the places where we're finding disinformation and fake news are so rampant. So please share with us a little bit about that.
So the EU has developed and popularized this acronym of FIMI for Foreign Information Manipulation and Interference. And as EU, so we define it, I want to go back to the definition, as a mostly non-illegal pattern of behavior that threatens or has the potential to negatively impact values, procedures, and political processes. Such activity is manipulative in character, conducted in an intentional and coordinated manner by state or non-state actors, including their proxy inside and outside of their own territory. So we are talking of pattern of behavior, systematic patterns of behavior by state or non-state actors, coordinated. So it's not only one individual sharing fake news, as we can see on social media. It's really a malign intentions to deter, to change the narrative and to influence negatively on discussion within the society. So it is a real threat to our democracy, and so the EU has worked on this concept and developed indeed a series of toolbox to prevent, to deter, and to respond. So we have set up a team in our strategic communication department in Brussels, who is in charge of monitoring social medias, debunking fake information, supporting articles by scientists, by journalists, that you can find on the website called EU versus Disinfo. We have identified in the last 5 years more than 750 cases of disinformation with concrete cases analysis by our experts. We have also implemented a code of conduct, European code of conduct for journalists and for media that we share also with social media platform. We have a European Digital Media Observatory to support fact-checkers and researchers. And our member states, I mean, it goes beyond the EU itself. It's EU and member states who are very active, including here in Uganda, where we work with organizations such as Debunk to build capacity, local capacity to be able to prevent disinformation. And then on the more political side, the EU has adopted last year, 2 years ago, the Digital Service Act. So you might see, for those of you who follow our commissioners on social media, some exchange of letters sometimes with between the EU Commission and Elon Musk or Facebook or Meta, where we call them toward the obligation that are provided by the Digital Service Act. So the Act provides transparency. We need to know what type of information is shared. When it's advertising, when it comes for foreign actors, the reader needs to know that. It has also increased the accountability for content towards the platform. It has set up a series of obligations for this platform. We were talking about freedom of speech. Yes, there is freedom of speech, but the freedom of speech, especially in the EU context, is regulated to prevent, hate speeches, racism speeches, all those type of speeches. So we have worked on tactical toolbox to prevent and deter, but we also have a policy framework to make sure that at least we try to have them free of disinformation.
So as we operate on this international stage, what is the difference? So perhaps I'll take this over to you, Mr. Kalyegira. And I'll cite an example. On December 4th, the Secretary of State Blinken of the US announced the expansion of the visa restriction policy, holding Ugandan officials or others who are believed to be responsible for or complicit in undermining democratic processes or policies, actions aimed at repressing members of marginalized communities. And this was specifically targeted towards the Anti-Homosexuality Act. Now, when something like this happens, are we talking about influence or interference?
Hard to know. It depends on what point of view. I guess from the US point of view and much of Western Europe, these LGBTQ rights have become as fundamental can get. And as James said earlier, but there's a culture divide, not just in sub-Saharan Africa, but of course in conservative, what you call Republican-leaning America, that also feels that fundamentally, threatens society. Now, of course, where this becomes a matter of interest to the US is from a practical point of view. No US government agency, corporated business or entity can sort of work under Uganda's law. So it puts the US in an awkward situation. They respect or must respect the local laws where they operate, in this case, Uganda, if it's a US embassy, USAID and other bodies. But at the same time, while they operate within the wider Ugandan geographical jurisdiction, they still remain US government entities or US businesses governed by American law. So it then made it difficult for them to know what to do. So it's not so much, to answer your point, it was not so much that they wanted to interfere in that sense, but they were stuck. Do you employ Ugandans? Do you work with Ugandans? Do you respect the laws of Uganda and violate your own laws? Do you refuse to employ, let's say, a transgender in an American, let's say, project in Uganda, respecting Uganda's laws and then violating America's laws? So I think to avoid that awkwardness, it's just a case of, we suspend these projects. As the World Bank said, whatever is going on continues to the end, but we can't start new laws. So I think that's the tricky part.
So in a way, it depends on where you're seated. What is your point of view? And now that we're talking about the international stage as well, I feel like James has something to say.
It's certainly interference. It's how I would see it. We need to remember that a lot of these policies that are imposed on us from these foreign governments, a lot of them also depend on the ideological positions of the voters of those parties that now control those governments. So in the case of the United States, obviously we have a Democrat administration in office, and they are very pro-LGBT, pro sort of progressive values. And so in imposing these sanctions on Uganda, they are partly catering to the interests of their base. So they get to go to their base during election season to say, hey, we stood up for the values that we cherish. We're defending minorities, sexual minorities, even in other countries, and we're going to challenge, because they are also under pressure from those same constituencies. Hey guys, we voted you into power. What are you doing about gays in Uganda? So obviously, in a way, they are responding to that need and announcing these sanctions, which fare well among their voters. So it may not even be so much that they may necessarily care about the issues here, but we're essentially being used as puppets so that they can serve their political interests domestically. And this is why it's always important for us to always look at the bigger picture, always.
Now that we are sort of touching on the international landscape, I'll go over to you, Dr. Kasaija. Maybe you could share with us a little bit about where we find ourselves. Is it where, the rest of the continent is finding themselves as well? As far as in particular policy goes, are there meaningful, policy changes that we can make to move us in a better direction as far as regulating and not necessarily, without impeding the freedom of expression? And I know it's a little bit on the fence, it's on the line, but I'd just like to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, freedom of expression and freedom of information. It's difficult. I can tell you it's difficult. But at the end of the day, also we have to have the capacity to identify, first of all, whether it is interference or whether it is a manipulation. I don't know whether we have that capacity, especially in view of the fact that most of our population is not yet exposed to some of these platforms, some of these conversation. The internet coverage is still low, so it becomes difficult. But for the government, of course, interference, that's the default line many of governments take when we have these conversations. I was reading an article in one of the journals in the US, Human Rights Journal, published at at Johns Hopkins University, where they declared that Uganda is on the barometer of gay rights. Uganda ranks very, very low. Now, the conversation around LGBTQ, we need to structure it within the context of the first generation rights. Now, the first generation rights covers political and civil, which everybody would know, the right to stand for elections, the right to do all that. The second generation rights are economic, social, and cultural. So the right to work, the right to food, the right to all that. We have third generation rights, which are the right to development, solidarity, what we call generally solidarity rights. But increasingly now we have the fourth generation, which is LGBTQ++, where we are being told, or where, not being told, but rather there is this view that even these people who are like that, they also have rights, which rights we need to respect. Now, this is a conversation, I think, even as a country, if you talk to people, even higher up in government, they will tell you, why do we legislate for social relations? Even in our local languages, we have people who are like that. It's one thing, this is a conversation one time last year, I had with the former Prime Minister, Amama Mbabazi. And I was asking him, so what is your stand on this act? And he said, look, if it were me, it's absolutely nonsensical that even we have this act. Because we do have these people in our communities. And so if you say it is an African, that's just actually not correct. So all I'm saying is, I think also there is a recognition, and we need to recognize that the world has moved. We live in the 21st century. That, yes, there are issues to do with LGBTQ, especially in the context of recruitment and stuff. But these people do exist. You cannot throw them in the lake or the river or the ocean. So you live and let live. This is what I would say. But of course, also we need to look at the politics of this. There's also the political angle to this conversation around rights, where there are some governments of which would come in to regulate because, these are foreign acts and they are alien to our communities and all this. We don't live as an island. We are in the community of nations. And so we need to move with other communities of nations now.